Basic idea of convolutional neural networks is to account for the spatial structure of data. For example, as against a fully connected layer we see on the left, we can have a locally connected layer where every perceptron in L-1th layer is connected only to some neighboring perceptrons in the nth layer. However, these weights may all be different, and what you could do, as is done in a convolutional neural network, is to constrain some of these weights to be the same. This is basically parameter sharing. Here we have the edges labeled red sharing the same weights, and the straight vertical edges will share the same weights. We will provide more motivation for this specific convolutional layer in the following slides. So one motivation is, of course, the parameter explosion in the multi-layer perceptrons. So with a 200 by 200 image and with 40,000 hidden units, you would have a large number of parameters. This is, of course, assuming a very simplistic representation of the image such as grayscale. There is also the problem of cursive dimensionality. With large number of features and parameters, we would also need large number of examples in the training data for accurate parameter estimation. This is especially important to counter the problem of overfitting on a very small sample. The Lego blocks in modern deep learning, which have helped address some of these issues, are as follows. We will consider the following architecture. So imagine that you have an input image. For every pixel, we would store the red, green and blue values. We could represent these three using three layers in the image. So you have R, G and B. If this image were 200 by 200, so we would have 40k pixels, each represented using R, G and B. At the input layer, these three, the R, G and B, would correspond to the simple feature maps. This feature map also is referred to as the depth. The idea is that in subsequent layers, we are able to characterize more interesting properties of the image by increasing depth. However, what we want to do is avoid making inferences about individual pixels all the time and be able to say something collectively about the entire image. So in the subsequent layers, we will have a narrowing down of this matrix, this 200 by 200 matrix, which means the length and the breadth would reduce. However, what we want to be able to do is infer interesting properties of the image through something called feature maps. So the simplistic feature map we had at the input layer will now be enriched with lots of interpolations, poolings and convolutions on the input layer to give you a much deeper representation. So what you see in the second or hidden layer is more depth, and the idea is to have an enriched feature map. So we have the advantage of somewhat summarized sense of the image, the 200 by 200 pixels, but more information obtained through all the other properties that are listed below. So patches or kernels, they form one part of the funnel. They provide for spatial interpolations between the pixels in the input. Strides, they allow you to downsample and look at interesting properties that have been obtained through interpolation in the kernels. And finally, padding leads to some shrinking across layers, and this is attributable to the patches. As you move the patches at intervals determined by the strides, you will find that some part of the input either needs to be ignored or needs to be padded with zeros. So this padding leads to a kind of shrinking across the layers. There are also other interesting Lego blocks such as pooling, inception, embeddings, and memory cells and backpropagation through time. We will discuss these issues in the subsequent lectures. For today, we will focus our attention on 2, 3 and 4, patches, strides and padding, and then revisit feature map. So we begin with this challenge, which we will try and address using these Lego blocks. So given a multi-layer perceptron for an input image which is 200 by 200 by 3, this the 3 is from RGB, the hidden layer with 40,000 neurons would result in how many parameters? Well, the answer is 4.8 billion parameters, and this can be obtained by multiplying 200 into 3, which is the input layer, into 40,000 in the hidden layer. This into is because of the fully connectedness assumption. The 40,000 is from the hidden layer, and these initial numbers are from the input layer. One can visualize this as follows. So we have 200 by 200 by 3, depth being 3, 200 by 200 being the length and breadth, and the hidden layer is, for the time being, of depth 1, and it consists of 40,000 neurons, which basically correspond to each of these pixels in the input. Now, is there a way we can deal with much fewer parameters that do justice to the structure of the problem? So imagine that we are trying to do object recognition on the image, or even classify the image. If you're interested in classifying images as those which contain pet animals against those which don't contain the pet animals, we would like to detect cats and dogs and basically, given a dictionary of possible pet animals, find if any one of them occurs in this image. So convolutional neural network is very suitable for this task. Question is, how many parameters would it result in? Would we have fewer parameters? Would we have a fewer number of neurons? Let's try and answer these questions.